When Hotline Miami was first released back in 2012, all I heard about was its grotesque violence, so I got the impression that it was something similar to a lot of video games of the 90s that use ridiculous carnage as a selling point. You know, disposable schlock. For a couple years, that was the beginning and end of my journey with Hotline Miami. I didn't give the game another thought until Hotline Miami 2 was approaching its release in early 2015. This inspired a second wave of Hotline Miami conversations. Instead of getting everyone's first impressions on Hotline Miami, the takes were helped by a couple years of contemplation, and I heard a broader array of more nuanced observations, including many on the game's surreal narrative. Apparently, Hotline Miami had a very trippy plot that inspired a lot of theory crafting, which got me intrigued. Now, a surrealistic plot is a very esoteric reason to try a video game, but rest assured, what I got was a far cry from my expectations, and I was introduced to a video game experience unlike any other. Starting the game up, the first thing you'll notice is the aesthetic. I mean, look at this title screen. Swaying neon colors hovering down the street. The music in the background is very slow-paced, laid back to the point where the song is almost passing out into a narcotic dream. Also, one might speculate why the title is in Russian. Press start game and the atmosphere changes entirely. You're thrown into a dark, featureless room where you learn the basics like the controls and what will be your objective for most of the game. Killing people. I mean, that's not very different from many games, right? The cutscene after that, ooh boy, this is where you get that undistilled Hotline Miami flavor. You walk into a room where three beings sit, each with an animal mask on their head and being lit by distinctly colored light. The beings speak enigmatically, and imply that the protagonist, which the fandom has dubbed Jacket, is having problems remembering his identity. They take him back through his memory to April 3rd, 1989. And this is where the game hooked me. Listen to that background music. With its thumping bass and experimental sounds, it's very abrasive. The first time I heard it, I was captivated, and I hadn't even gotten to the first level. If you look closely, you'll notice that the camera tilts as the player moves around the apartment. I only mention it because it just further pushes that trippy feel that the game has. When you check the phone, you get a strange message telling you that the cookies you ordered have been delivered. Outside your apartment, there's a box with a rooster's mask and a note with a threatening tone ordering you to pick up a briefcase and deliver it to a dumpster. Thus we enter level 1, or level prelude. Now let's sniff around for that briefcase. Ugh. Hotline Miami is brutal. It completely lived up to its reputation of ultra-violence. Strike an enemy with a bat and his head explodes like a balloon. Shoot him with a shotgun and his guts will evacuate his torso and fly across the hallway. Even hand-to-hand combat is deadly. Get an enemy onto the ground and you can bash his head into the floor. Aside from punching an enemy and knocking him to the ground, all it takes is a single attack to kill an enemy. Even a pistol feels powerful, whereas in most games, a pistol is a gun you start with but want to replace with a superior weapon as quickly as possible. Every weapon feels deadly, although you'd prefer something with automatic fire like an assault rifle or a wide spread like a shotgun. It's all about making it easier to land a shot on an enemy. It goes both ways, however. In the same way you can drop a mobster with a single bullet, the enemy can do the same to you. All it takes is some gunfire, or an enemy getting the first strike with a melee weapon and you're dead. Because of how chaotic the gameplay can be and how easy it is to die, you will be dying a lot. The good news is restarting is quick and checkpointing happens at the start of each floor, so the non-stop pace of Hotline Miami never loses fuel. The gameplay is very fast but gruesome, a chaotic slurry of brutality and speed. You move through each floor walking through a red mist. It's a loud, bloody ride, up until the mission is complete. Once all your enemies are dead, the atmosphere turns sterile. After completing missions, the music drops silent and you have to walk back down to your car. While an uncaring hum plays in the background, you go back through your carnage and are given a chance to look it over. You see their bodies already begun to rot. You step through puddles of their cold blood. Maybe you feel weirded out. Maybe you're disgusted. Hotline Miami is fun and exciting, but it's not a full-on celebration of violence without holding a mirror up to the brutality and getting introspective. Like a good cocktail with a bitter aftertaste, each foray into heart-pumping action is chased with a chilling denouement. In fact, the whole game has that feeling of being really exciting but just a little too much. Even if you just played through the game casually and didn't give much thought to the story, that would be the takeaway you'd get from Hotline. Excitement pushed to the excess. What happens when you get too much? I mean, I could end the video right here with that thesis and it'd be pretty spot on. Well, thanks for watching everyone. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more video game analyses and I'm just kidding. One of Hotline Miami's strong points is how you can play it very casually, but still get a very strong impression that differentiates itself from other action games. But Hotline, if it pleases you, also warrants deeper analysis. Most of the game is you, the player, controlling a single character and going around levels, killing people. That's not very unusual for a game. Neither is the fact that Jacket is a silent protagonist. However, there's a special feeling of isolation that comes from most of the game being speedy kill fests interspersed with these little scenes where Jacket goes to visit his friend Beard. It's a good break from the violence, but even in these conversations with Beard, something is off. He talks around Jacket, bringing up Jacket's past or something going on in the city. Beard doesn't even seem to be a real person in the world, but rather a representation of a larger body of people. Beard seems to take on a multitude of jobs. The conversation is disconnected, and Beard is the only person you can talk to in these scenes. You can look around the joint, but no one's gonna chat. You're just a passerby, ducking your head in for a sec to pick up a pizza. You're a visitor, and this isn't your place. Let's zoom out a little bit and look at the main plot. In this story, Jacket is getting strange phone calls coercing him into raiding places around Miami and murdering scores of people. That is, until he himself is attacked by an intruder where his supposed girlfriend is killed and Jacket is left for dead. After coming out of his coma, Jacket heads to the police station to confront his would-be killer, and he obtains a file on the police investigation into those strange phone calls. They've been traced to a local Russian mob, so Jacket tracks down the head of the mafia and kills him. There is no denouement. That's where Jacket's story ends. A simple enough plot, but the weird thing is most of that plot synopsis happens in the last act of the narrative. For most of Jacket's story, for most of the game, he's going places, killing everyone, rinse repeat. The only sense of progression, really, is atmospheric, is watching the civilian environments gradually succumb to urban decay until the ultraviolence of Jacket's line of work seeps into those hangouts that he visits after each mission. Again, the player is very isolated in this world. You read about the rising wave of mobster violence through newspaper clippings that you find in your apartment before each mission, and you hear a bit about it from Beard, but it isn't until the final part, that final part where he comes out of his coma and goes looking for a resolution, that Jacket truly becomes an agent. He takes control of the story. Actually, Jacket's girlfriend, the one that gets killed, you meet her at the end of Chapter 3. After clearing the building, slaughtering everyone, you, the player, must enter the bedroom to confront a lady. She speaks to Jacket and assumes he's there to finish her off, but what actually happens is he brings her out to his car and takes her home to his place. From there on until the assassin kills her later, she doesn't say a word to Jacket, or rather, she doesn't speak to the player and the player can't chat with her. She lives in Jacket's apartment and the relationship is implied, which is weird, right? If you were watching a movie and there was a character that spent a lot of time on screen, even in the foreground, even spending a lot of time being around important characters, but that character never talked to anyone, that would be very eerie, wouldn't it? Well, in the same way that it could be read as a flaw with a movie, like did someone delete all that character's lines from the script, it could also be the intent of the filmmakers. Maybe they'd want you to feel disconnected, in the same way that the creators of Hotline Miami wanted the player to feel a strange disconnection with the story. So many narrative elements in Hotline are like this. You can run by them, but you never get to stop, pick them up, and look closely. You only get a few lines of dialogue at most. The story is scattershot. Now, maybe that's because for most of the plot, Jacket is in a coma, so this whole story is just a dream of his, a recollection as his mind is putting itself back together. Even after he comes out of the coma though, the story still has a disjointed atmosphere even if his motivations are somewhat clear. He's still a silent protagonist and never truly privy to what his rationale is. And Jacket is the only protagonist until part 5. After you beat chapter 15 and get credits, the game extends for a few chapters more, and the perspective shifts onto Biker. Unlike Jacket, Biker is not a silent protagonist. He has dialogue and his motivations are explicit. He wants to get to the bottom of this phone call business, and his short plot takes him down a trail to the source. Now, the player has encountered Biker before. Back during Jacket's story, during Chapter 7, Jacket encounters Biker at the phone station and you have to take him out in a boss fight. There's no question about it, Jacket kills Biker. But when you play Biker's story and head to the phone station, the opposite is true. Biker kills Jacket. Hotline is already a surreal, incoherent narrative, but when you add in this contradiction, the existence of two opposing plots, the story gets even more incomprehensible, and you're left thinking that the only real thing in the story is the violence that is directly in front of you in that specific moment, and even then those moments are still dreamlike, and that again is a form of isolation when your sense of reality is receded back to yourself and only yourself, and that the world around you, as vast and complex as it might seem, might as well be a hallucination, might as well be made of mist. Where does Biker's story go though? Biker's thread leads him to a couple of janitors that have been skulking around the game very mysteriously. He tracks them down to their base of operations in a sewer. Depending on whether you found all the collectibles in the game, Biker can go on their computer and find out the truth of their operation before going down to confront them about it, and how the conversation pans out can change depending on if you do that. The janitors take on completely different demeanors if you check the computer upstairs. If you didn't or couldn't, they will be smarmy and dismissive and forego any explanations. On a surface level, they just instigated citywide gang warfare for the hell of it. But on a deeper level, there's a metatextual reading. The janitors are said to be avatars for the two creators of Denton Games, and their dialogue practically breaks the fourth wall, stopping just before directly addressing the player. When Biker asks if they think that everything they did was just a game, they reply by asking Biker, and maybe the player, if he enjoyed the experience. It's just a line of dialogue, but it makes me ask the question, is Hotline Miami a game about playing games? Is that the theme of it? Is that the art of Hotline Miami, the metaphor? I roll my eyes at the notion because I think that theme is overdone in video games. For many years, it seemed like the only way a video game could be considered art or intellectual is if it was some commentary on the experience of playing video games. At that point in 2015, when I played the nearly 3 years old Hotline Miami, that idea, that commentary was very rote. Later that year, Undertale would come out and go on to be one of my favorite games, like top 10 material, and while I liked Undertale's commentary on being a player in a game, after that I was done with games being about playing games. I never want to experience those themes again. That being said, what are the janitors saying about me, the player, playing Hotline Miami and engaging in all this violence? I don't think it's saying anything too deep or complex. Maybe it's a ponder in how it's weird that us players find all this brutality so entertaining, which I've seen before across many media. Or maybe, well, since the janitors are based off the creators, is them instigating a meaningless gang war and forcing people like Jacket to kill scores of people a metaphor for them creating Hotline Miami and making players play it? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't think too deeply on a small bit of dialogue from what's widely considered the bad end of this game. But it gets me thinking that maybe games are inherently isolating experiences. You, the player, are a contestant in the story, usually taking the role of a single character or a party of heroes. You submerge yourself in a narrative and become an entity in this world. Or at least those are my feelings playing many video games. Why Hotline Miami appeals so much to me is that all that emotional dynamism is emphasized by the game's designs and aesthetics. Hotline Miami is a game that makes you feel disconnected from its world. While many games are praised for their interactivity, there is something to limiting the player's ability to interact with the game's world. Hotline gives you the power fantasy of doing ridiculous carnage, but contrasts that with the powerlessness of lacking any ability to get any answers or solve the story's mysteries, which some players will not care about in the slightest, which is completely okay. But it is interesting that the player is a murder lord that cannot intelligently engage with the plot. At least, not until the very end. Just at the end of Hotline Miami 1, you do get some answers, but the answers might not be satisfactory. So, back to Chapter 19. If you got all the collectibles in the game and figured out the password to the computer upstairs, Biker finds out what those rascally janitors are up to. When he confronts them about it, they just spill the beans. It's quite the whiplash to go from the barely corporeal journey of Hotline Miami to being told, right to your face, the plot. Very matter-of-factly, too. So, here's the plot. The two janitors are nationalists that run a terrorist organization called 50 Blessings. They threaten its members to kill Russian mobsters and other targets. Their operation in Miami is one but of several operations around the USA. There's still some ambiguity to what their specific goal is. Biker assumes that they are doing it to topple what's called the Russo-American Coalition. Maybe he read that on the computer upstairs. There's nothing called that in real history. This touches on to something that's elaborated in the sequel. The Hotline Miami games take place in an alternate universe. You only get a taste of it in this first game, but in this alternate timeline, the relationship between the USA and Russia has some very bad blood. The Russo-American Coalition, judging by its name, is some kind of alliance or truce between Russia and the United States. The janitors are foreboding in that they hint that this is only the beginning. 50 Blessings will spread and they have big plans for the future. I don't know if a sequel was announced right away when Hotline was released, but I can imagine a lot of players assuming that a follow-up was in the future. Regardless, the player is given a big answer for what's going on. There's the implication that the story isn't over, but anyone is allowed to dwell further on the narrative thus far. What about Jacket's photo that he tosses away at the end? What about the three entities in Jacket's subconscious? What about the freaking contradicting stories between Jacket and Biker? There are still many threads dangling from this tale of Miami gang warfare. There are still many things to contemplate. In fact, the big plot dump that the janitors give you is pretty strange for how direct it is. It's so direct and coherent compared to the rest of Hotline's ambiguity that it doesn't feel real to the nature of this story, like it's some sort of nasty trick. I can imagine a lot of players outright ignoring it because of how strangely unobscured it is. It seems too honest to be true. On the other hand, while it answers a few things, it also brings up more questions. It's more direct, but it's not conclusive. It's a couple strings in the grand web of Hotline Miami. This is a convoluted story. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's an effective, convoluted story. Bewilderment is part of the entertainment. A month ago or so, I watched Inherent Vice, the P.T. Anderson flick, and damn if I had any idea what was going on in that movie. It's perplexing as hell, but I enjoyed the labyrinthine ride. Confusion is a valid emotion for art to evoke in us. The problem is most of us associate it with bad, unintentionally confusing experiences with little payoff. The creators have admitted they made the story intentionally confusing on purpose, and not that intentionality makes something automatically valid. The confusion of Hotline is captivating. Some stories you want to be told very conventionally and linearly. Other times you prefer having a bunch of fragments dangled in front of your face and you're left to your own devices to put the puzzle together, even if you cannot create a complete picture. The creators have also admitted that they took a lot of inspiration from the Nicholas Winding Refn film, Drive, from 2011. Not terribly surprising. If you had watched that film, you could see that Hotline takes some of the iconography, the gore, and the atmosphere from Drive, but Hotline does more than enough to be its own thing. I wonder, what if you took the gameplay here but told a conventional story? What if you dialed back the psychedelic and dreamy elements of the plot and geared towards a more traditional narrative? Something reminiscent of a Scorsese film or something by Quentin Tarantino. It would work perfectly fine, but it wouldn't be Hotline Miami. It's really cool that this indie game was able to find its own voice and do something special in the crime genre, not just video games but across all artistic mediums. That's what makes it good art. Hotline Miami is a unique game worth analyzing and thinking about. I focus on the aesthetics, violence, isolation, and confusion of Hotline Miami, but you can interpret this game dozens of ways. Maybe to you, what's fascinating about the story of this game is a seemingly non-violent person coerced into gang warfare and his mind snaps. What does this game say about organized crime and the violence that spurs from it? What does this game say about fragility of human beings when most games have you, the player, control an overpowered super being and the enemies are hundreds of goons? Even on its own, Hotline is a complete game. It's gruesome, psychedelic, and loud. It's really fun, and I still replay it for that excellent, fast-paced gameplay. There's nothing out there that scratches the itch that it scratches. If it had stayed a single game, or if I took some time before playing the sequel, I think I would have come up with some theories on what the whole plot meant and what's really going on. It's a thing though, because a lot of these mysteries are given arguably canonical answers in HM2, and I played the sequel right after I was finished. Hotline Miami 2 has its problems, but if I'm being honest, I love it more than the first. I'm gonna show my hand here, but the reason why I still talk about Hotline Miami years later, and the reason why I'm talking about it in a video essay right now, is because of what that sequel did for me. If Hotline Miami 1 left a strong impression on me, Hotline Miami 2 was one of the most formative video game artistic experiences I've ever had. Yep, we're not done with this conversation. You can't talk about Hotline Miami without talking about its sequel, and with that game, there's so much more to unravel. We'll close the book on Hotline Miami for now, but when we return, we'll look into how its sequel recontextualized its gameplay mechanics, themes, and metaphors. Stay tuned.